The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Kendrick as the morning sun crested the mountain ridge, and Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez stepped onto the tarmac, carrying a rifle case that drew immediate attention from the ground crew. The case was custom, longer than standard issue, and she held it with the familiar ease of someone who had carried it across continents. A young specialist jogged over to meet her, clipboard in hand. "You must be the observer lady," he said, not bothering to check her rank insignia. "Briefing room is this way." Vasquez followed without correcting him. She had learned years ago that corrections rarely changed first impressions, and first impressions rarely mattered once the shooting started. Inside the briefing room, Master Chief Brad Coulter stood before a wall-mounted map detailing the mountain terrain surrounding the base. 8 men sat in folding chairs, their postures relaxed, their attention casual. This was routine for them. Coulter tapped the map with a laser pointer. "Gentlemen, standard reconnaissance. We ascend via the Northern Trail, establish observation posts at these 3 points, document terrain features, and extract by 1800 tomorrow." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "Command has attached an observer to this exercise. She will remain at base camp and monitor communications." The door opened behind him. Coulter turned, saw Vasquez, and let his eyes travel from her boots to her face in a slow assessment that communicated everything about his expectations. "Sergeant Vasquez," he said, "welcome. You can set up at the comms station. We will handle the actual field work." "Sergeant First Class," Vasquez said, "Marine Scout Sniper qualified. I am here to observe mountain warfare techniques for a joint training assessment." Coulter smiled, the expression carrying no warmth. "We do not need shooting tips, Sergeant." He turned back to his team. "Wheels up at 0400. Get some rest." The SEALs filed out, a few glancing at Vasquez with undisguised curiosity. One of them, younger than the others with the careful eyes of someone who noticed details, paused at the door. His gaze lingered on the ribbon stack above her left pocket. Bronze star with V device. Purple heart with oak leaf cluster indicating multiple awards. Combat action ribbon with stars that suggested more deployments than most soldiers saw in a career. Wherever you're watching this right now, maybe you have seen that look before. The moment when someone realizes the person in front of them does not match their assumptions. Maybe you've been on the receiving end of that look yourself. That moment of recognition, when someone finally sees what was there all along. The young SEAL frowned, confusion crossing his features, then followed his teammates out. Vasquez found the intelligence office and requested the mission packet. The petty officer on duty handed it over without comment, and she spread the documents across an empty desk. Thermal imaging of the route, dated 3 weeks prior. Satellite photography from the same period. No ground verification. No updated assessments. She pulled a topographic map closer and began marking points with a red pen. A narrow canyon at the 4-kilometer mark, perfect for channeling movement into a kill zone. A ridge at 6 kilometers where elevation would give shooters overlapping fields of fire. A boulder field at 8 kilometers that would force any team into single-file movement. 3 ambush points. 3 places where 8 men could die if someone was waiting. Vasquez gathered the marked documents and found Coulter in the equipment bay, checking his team's gear with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done it 1,000 times. "Master Chief," she said, "I have concerns about the intelligence package." Coulter did not look up. "Concerns? The thermal imaging is 3 weeks old. No ground verification of the northern approach. If there's been any hostile movement into the area, we would not know." Now Coulter looked at her, his expression patient in the way adults are patient with children who ask obvious questions. "Sergeant, we have run 100 operations in these mountains. The area is cold. Local population is friendly. This is a training exercise, not an invasion. I identified 3 potential ambush sites along your planned route. If you adjust your approach to the Western Trail, you would have better sight lines and easier extraction options." Coulter set down the equipment he was inspecting. "I appreciate your enthusiasm," he said, and his tone suggested he appreciated nothing of the sort. "But we know these mountains. You are here to observe. So observe." He returned to his work. Vasquez stood for a moment, the marked maps in her hand, then nodded once and walked away. Back in the intelligence office, she requested updated satellite imagery from the operations center. Lieutenant Commander Davis denied the request within minutes. Assets committed elsewhere. Training exercise does not justify premium allocation. Vasquez sat alone in the quiet room, studying the topographic map. The northern trail, the ambush points, the sheer cliff face to the east that no one would ever think to climb because no one would ever be desperate enough to try. She pulled out a notebook and began plotting an alternate route. 400 feet of vertical rock. No rope. No safety equipment. Just holds in the stone and whatever strength remained in her hands. If she was wrong about the intelligence, she would look foolish. That was acceptable. If she was right, she would need to reach a position above whatever was waiting. And the cliff was the only way to get there. She marked the route, memorized it, and began assembling a go-bag. Rifle, ammunition, medical supplies, water. When she finished, she sat in the darkness and waited for 0400. The team departed at 0400, 8 figures moving in tactical formation toward the mountain trail, their night vision equipment casting the world in shades of green. Vasquez stood at the edge of base camp and watched them disappear into the darkness, her rifle case at her feet, her orders clear. Remain here. Monitor communications. Observe. She waited until the last man vanished into the tree line, then carried her equipment to a rocky outcropping 50 meters from the communications tent. The position offered clear sight lines up the mountain while remaining concealed from casual observation. She assembled her spotting scope with practiced efficiency and began tracking the team's movement through the pre-dawn shadows. 3 hours into the climb, Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Webb was pulling rear security when he felt the strange sensation of being watched. He paused, scanning the terrain behind them, and caught a glint of glass from the base camp far below. Someone was observing their progress through a scope. The observer, he realized, she was actually doing her job. He turned back to the trail and pushed forward to catch up with the team. At the front of the formation, Coulter set an aggressive pace that had even his experienced operators breathing hard. The mountain air thinned as they climbed, and the trail narrowed to a series of switchbacks carved into the rock face. Petty Officer First Class Reeves fell in a step beside his team leader. Still thinking about our babysitter back there, Reeves said, "Command must be running out of real assignments if they are sending observers to watch us walk up a hill." Coulter allowed himself a small laugh. She can write a nice report about how the teams do it right. Maybe include some diagrams. He gestured toward the ridge ahead. First checkpoint in 20 minutes. We're making good time. The team reached the checkpoint as the sun broke over the eastern peaks, flooding the mountainside with pale golden light. Coulter pulled out his radio and reported their position to base camp. Alpha Team at Checkpoint 1. Proceeding on schedule. All personnel accounted for. A pause, then Vasquez's voice came through the speaker, calm and professional. Alpha Team, I am tracking movement signatures approximately 2 kilometers north of your position. Multiple heat sources moving in coordinated patterns. Recommend you hold position while I attempt to verify. Coulter keyed his radio. Negative. Probably wildlife. Deer move in herds through these valleys. We are continuing on schedule. The signatures are maintaining tactical spacing. Recommend caution on approach to Checkpoint 2. Coulter exchanged a glance with Reeves, both men sharing the same thought. He keyed the radio again. Acknowledged. Alpha Team out. He switched off the radio and shook his head. Tactical spacing, he muttered. She has been reading too many field manuals. The team resumed their climb. Webb found himself walking beside Reeves as the trail widened. He had been thinking about the observer since they left base camp, and the question finally pushed past his discipline. That's Sergeant back at base. Did you see her ribbon stack? Reeves shrugged without interest. Probably desk awards. Meritorious service for filing paperwork on time. Women do not see real combat, Webb. You know that. She had a Bronze Star with V device. That is a Valor Award. Reeves snorted. Maybe she was near something that exploded and they gave her a medal for not crying. Focus on the mission. Webb let the conversation drop, but the image of those ribbons stayed with him. Combat Action Ribbon with multiple deployment stars. Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster. Those were not paperwork awards. Those were scars translated into fabric and metal. Far below at base camp, Vasquez lowered her spotting scope and keyed the secure channel to FOB operations. Vasquez to operations. Requesting immediate satellite imagery update for grid coordinates 774 by 320. Priority request. Lieutenant Commander Davis responded within seconds. Negative on imagery request. Assets are committed to priority operations. Your grid is designated training area with no active threat assessment. I am observing coordinated movement signatures that do not match wildlife patterns. 8 personnel are ascending into potential contact zone. Sergeant, this is a training exercise. The area has been cold for 6 months. Your request is denied. Operations out. The channel went silent. Vasquez sat motionless for a long moment, watching the tiny figures of the SEAL team continue their ascent toward the second checkpoint, toward the narrow canyon she had marked on her map, toward the ridge with overlapping fields of fire. She made her decision. Moving quickly now, she broke down her observation post and returned to her quarters. She packed a lightweight assault bag with ammunition, water, emergency medical supplies, and a compact first aid kit. Her rifle went into a padded drag bag that would protect it during the climb. She strapped the bag across her back and adjusted the weight until it sat centered between her shoulder blades. Then she walked to the eastern edge of base camp and studied the cliff face that rose 400 feet above her. Sheer granite with minimal holds. No established climbing route. No safety equipment. Just rock and gravity and whatever strength she could find in her hands. The cliff would put her above and behind the team's planned route. If she was wrong about the threat, she would have wasted 4 hours on an impossible climb and earned herself a reprimand for abandoning her post. If she was right, she would be the only thing between 8 men and whatever was waiting for them on that mountain. Vasquez checked her watch. The team was 90 minutes from checkpoint 2. She had 90 minutes to climb 400 feet of vertical rock. She found her first handhold and began to climb. The team reached the summit ridge as the morning sun climbed toward its apex, casting sharp shadows across the rocky terrain. Coulter raised his fist, and the formation halted, 8 men taking positions behind natural cover while their leader surveyed the landscape ahead. The view stretched for miles in every direction, snow-capped peaks rising against a crystalline sky, the kind of scenery that made men forget they were in dangerous territory. Coulter keyed his radio. Alpha Team at checkpoint 2. All clear. Holding position for water and assessment. He leaned against a boulder and pulled out his canteen, allowing himself a moment to appreciate the successful ascent. Textbook movement. No complications. The observer and her tactical spacing concerns seemed almost amusing now, a reminder of why field experience mattered more than classroom theory. 200 meters below the summit, concealed in a shallow depression on the eastern cliff face, Vasquez pressed her eye to her spotting scope and felt her blood turn cold. The heat signatures she had tracked from base camp had resolved into distinct shapes. Men with weapons, moving in 3 coordinated groups, converging on the summit ridge from the north, west, and south. She counted quickly. 15. No, more behind the rock formations. At least 25 armed fighters positioning themselves in a textbook ambush formation. The SEALs were surrounded on 3 sides with a cliff at their back. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice flat despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Alpha Team, you have hostile contacts converging on your position. Count 25+. 3 directions. Recommend immediate withdrawal to the eastern approach. Coulter's voice came back dismissive. Negative. We have clear sight lines in all directions. There is nothing out here but rocks and... The first gunshot cracked across the mountain like thunder, and Petty Officer Kowalski dropped where he stood. For frozen heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the mountain erupted in gunfire from 3 directions. Muzzle flashes sparking from behind boulders and ridgelines. Bullets ricocheting off stone and tearing through the thin air. Coulter dove behind cover as rounds impacted centimeters from his head. Contact, he roared into his radio. Multiple shooters, all directions. Kowalski is down. Request immediate air support. The response came through broken with static. Negative on air support. Weather system moving in from the west. All rotary assets grounded. Say again, no air support available. Another SEAL screamed and collapsed, clutching his thigh. A third took a round through the shoulder and slammed against the rocks. In 30 seconds, the ambush had reduced their effective fighting strength by nearly half. Webb pressed himself against a boulder barely wide enough to cover his body, his rifle up, searching for targets. He counted muzzle flashes. 20, 25, more than 3 times their number, and the enemy held the high ground on 3 sides. He grabbed Kowalski by his tactical vest and dragged him behind cover, checking for a pulse. Weak but present. Entry wound in the upper chest. He keyed his radio. Webb to base. We are pinned down at checkpoint 2. 3 wounded, 1 critical. Enemy force 25 plus. We cannot hold this position. Vasquez heard the transmission as she clung to the cliff face, 150 feet above the base of the ascent. Her fingers ached. Her forearms burned. Below her, the drop was far enough to kill. Above her, 250 feet of vertical rock stood between her and the ridgeline. She had been climbing for 40 minutes. She had maybe 10 minutes before the team was overrun. Hold position, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the exertion. Help is coming. Coulter's response was raw, with desperation and fury. From where? You're at base camp. We need air support, not radio advice. Vasquez did not respond. She found her next handhold, tested it, and pulled herself higher. On the summit ridge, Coulter took stock of his situation with the cold clarity of a man who understood he might die in the next few minutes. 3 wounded, 2 of them badly. 5 effectives, including himself. Ammunition sufficient for maybe 15 more minutes of sustained fire. Enemy forces advancing methodically, using cover, not rushing. They knew they had the advantage. They could afford to be patient. He pulled his sidearm and checked the magazine. 15 rounds. When the rifles ran dry, it would be pistols. When the pistols ran dry, it would be knives. Webb crawled to his position, face streaked with someone else's blood. Master Chief, we cannot stay here. They are flanking us from the south. Coulter nodded. I know. He looked at the cliff behind them, a sheer drop into nothing. No retreat. No reinforcement. No air support. He keyed his radio one final time, broadcasting on the emergency channel. Any station, this is Alpha Team. We are surrounded and taking casualties at Grid 774 by 321. Request any available assistance. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man making peace with his fate. We are not going to last much longer. The radio crackled with static. Then Vasquez's voice, calm as still water. 10 minutes. Hold for 10 minutes. Coulter stared at his radio, then at the cliff face behind him, then at the impossible angle required to reach the ridgeline above the enemy positions. No one could climb that. No one would even try. He turned back to his men and raised his rifle. 10 minutes, he called out. We hold for 10 minutes. He did not believe help was coming, but he had nothing else to believe in. Vasquez was 200 feet up the cliff face when her left handhold crumbled. For one terrible second, she hung by 3 points of contact, her fingers screaming, her boots scraping against smooth granite, searching for purchase. The drag bag on her back shifted, pulling her center of gravity away from the wall. Below her, the rocks waited with patient indifference. She found a crack in the stone, jammed her fingers into it, and pulled herself flat against the cliff. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Blood dripped from her torn fingertips, leaving dark smears on the pale rock. 200 feet down. 200 feet to go. Above her, gunfire echoed across the mountain in staccato bursts. She reached for the next hold and kept climbing. On the summit ridge, Webb pressed a field dressing against Kowalski's chest wound and watched the fabric darken with blood. The wounded man's breathing was shallow, his skin gray, his eyes unfocused. He needed a surgeon within the hour, or he would not survive. Webb tied off the bandage and knew that surgeons did not grow on mountainsides. Reloading, Reeves shouted from behind a nearby boulder. His rifle cracked twice more, then fell silent as he slammed a fresh magazine home. "That is my last one, Master Chief. After this I am down to pistol." Coulter did not respond. He was focused on the southern approach, where 3 enemy fighters were advancing through a shallow gully that would bring them within grenade range in less than 2 minutes. He fired 3 rounds, saw 1 man drop, watched the other 2 take cover. They were patient. They knew time was on their side. At Forward Operating Base Kendrick, Colonel Patricia Harmon burst into the operations center and demanded a situation report. The radio operator's face told her everything she needed to know before he spoke. "Alpha Team is pinned at Checkpoint 2, he said. 3 wounded, possibly 4. Enemy force estimated at 25. They are requesting air support, but weather has grounded all assets." Harmon grabbed the radio handset. "Alpha Team, this is Colonel Harmon. What is your status?" Coulter's voice came through strained and breathless. "Colonel, we are surrounded. Ammunition critical. Casualties mounting. We need extraction now." Harmon closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Where is Sergeant First Class Vasquez?" The radio operator checked his logs. "She left base camp approximately 90 minutes ago. Last transmission indicated she was heading up the mountain." Harmon felt something shift in her chest. Not surprise. Recognition. She had read Vasquez's classified file before approving her attachment to this exercise. 847 confirmed kills. Si combat de promo. The woman they called the Ghost of Fallujah. She keyed the radio. "Alpha Team, hold your position. Help is coming." Coulter's response was bitter. "From where, Colonel?" "There is no one else on this mountain." Harmon did not answer. She did not know how to explain that the most lethal sniper in Marine Corps history was currently climbing a cliff face with her bare hands. She was not certain Coulter would believe her if she tried. 300 feet up, Vasquez paused on a narrow ledge barely wide enough for her boots, her back pressed against the stone, her hands shaking with exhaustion. She flexed her fingers and watched blood well from a dozen small cuts. The muscles in her forearms felt like they had been filled with broken glass. She looked up, 100 feet to the ridgeline. She looked at her hands. They would hold. They had to hold. She reached for the next crack in the rock and resumed her ascent. On the ridge, a grenade landed 10 meters from Webb's position. He dove flat as the explosion showered him with rock fragments, his ears ringing, his vision blurred. When he raised his head, he saw Petty Officer Chun lying motionless, blood pooling beneath his body. For down, for still fighting. And the enemy was closing from every direction. Coulter crawled to Webb's position, his shoulder wound leaving a dark trail on the stone. "We have maybe 5 minutes," he said. His voice carried no fear, only the flat acceptance of a man who had made his peace. "Fix bayonets if you have them." Webb stared at his team leader. Bayonets had not been standard issue for years. Coulter was speaking in metaphor. The final stand. The last resort. He checked his rifle. Half a magazine remaining. He checked his pistol. Full. 15 rounds. 20 round between him and whatever came next. Vasquez pulled herself over the edge of the cliff and lay flat on the rock, her chest heaving, her hands trembling, her vision swimming with exhaustion. She allowed herself 5 seconds. 5 seconds to let the fire in her muscles subside. 5 seconds to force her breathing back under control. Then she unstrapped the drag bag from her back, extracted her rifle, and began crawling toward the ridgeline that overlooked the enemy positions. Below her, spread across the mountainside like pieces on a game board, 23 armed fighters advanced on 8 American soldiers. They moved with confidence, with patience, with the certainty of men who knew they held every advantage. They did not know she was above them. They did not know she could see every one of them. Vasquez settled behind her rifle, pressed her eye to the scope, and began to calculate. Vasquez pressed her eye to the scope and counted. 27 hostile fighters spread across 3 positions, advancing in coordinated waves toward the summit ridge. The SEALs had perhaps 3 minutes before they were overrun. She could see Coulter behind a boulder, blood darkening his shoulder, still firing with one functional arm. She could see Webb dragging a wounded man toward better cover. She could see the bodies of those who would not be dragged anywhere. She exhaled slowly and let her heartbeat settle into the rhythm she had learned across 6 deployments and 800 kills. The mountain wind pushed against her cheek at 4 miles per hour from the northwest. Distance to the enemy commander directing the assault from behind a rock formation, 340 meters. Elevation differential, plus 62 meters. She adjusted her scope 2 clicks right. 1 click up. The commander was shouting orders, gesturing toward the southern approach where his men were preparing to rush the final distance. He had maybe 30 seconds to live and no idea that death was watching him through crosshairs. Vasquez took a breath, released half of it, held the rest. She squeezed the trigger. The commander's head snapped back, and he collapsed without a sound. For one frozen moment, every fighter on the mountain stopped moving, their brains struggling to process what had just happened. Their leader had been standing. Now he was not. No sound of a shot from the American position. No muzzle flash they could see. Vasquez worked the bolt and acquired her second target. The machine gunner providing suppressive fire on the western approach died before he could turn his weapon toward the new threat. The radio man, reaching for his handset to call for guidance, took a round through the chest and crumpled over his equipment. 3 men dead in 8 seconds, and the remaining fighters had not yet identified where the shots were coming from. On the summit ridge, Webb heard the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle from somewhere above him and watched an enemy fighter collapse mid-stride. Then another, then a third. He pressed himself against his boulder and scanned the ridgeline, searching for the source. Someone was shooting from above and behind the enemy positions. Someone with a clear angle on every hostile fighter on the mountain. Someone who was not missing. He counted the falling bodies. 4, 5, 6. Vasquez shifted her aim to the left group, the fighters who had been preparing to flank the American position from the south. They were scrambling now, shouting, trying to find cover from an enemy they could not see. She dropped the first man as he ran, the second as he dove behind a rock that was not quite large enough, the third as he raised his rifle toward the ridgeline, finally understanding where death was coming from. 11 men down in 17 seconds. The center group broke formation and scattered, their discipline shattering under the weight of invisible, unstoppable fire. Vasquez tracked a running fighter for half a second, led him by 2 body lengths, and squeezed. He tumbled forward and did not rise. She found another target, adjusted for the wind that had shifted slightly, and fired again. Coulter watched the massacre unfold from behind his boulder, his wounded arm forgotten, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. Hostiles were dropping in every direction, cut down by a shooter he could not see, firing from an angle that should have been impossible. The cliff face behind them was sheer granite. No one could have climbed it. No one could be up there. But someone was. And that someone was systematically eliminating every threat on the mountain. Webb saw a fighter emerge from cover and sprint toward the northern trail, abandoning the attack in favor of survival. The man made it 6 steps before his legs buckled, and he fell face first into the rocks. 2 more followed him, running in different directions, and both died within seconds of each other. 18, 19, 20. The surviving fighters reached the same conclusion simultaneously. They ran, not tactically, not in organized retreat, but in blind panic, scrambling over rocks and through gullies, desperate to escape the killing ground the mountain had become. Vasquez let 2 of them go. They were young, barely more than boys, and they were running away from the Americans rather than toward them. But the 3 behind them were older, harder, and they were pausing to fire backward as they retreated. She dropped all 3 in 4 seconds. 23 confirmed kills in 51 seconds. Silence fell over the mountain. The wind carried the smell of gunpowder and copper. Nothing moved except the clouds drifting across the pale blue sky. Webb raised his head slowly, scanning the terrain that had been filled with muzzle flashes moments before. Bodies lay scattered across the rocks in every direction, fallen in the positions where Vasquez's bullets had found them. He saw no movement. He heard no gunfire. The battle was over. Coulter's voice broke the silence, ragged with exhaustion and something that might have been awe. "Who the hell is shooting?" His radio crackled. Vasquez's voice came through, calm and professional, as if she were reporting weather conditions. "Threat neutralized. 23 hostiles down. Recommend you hold position for medical assessment. I am coming to you." Coulter stared at his radio for a long moment. Then he looked at the cliff face behind him, at the 400 feet of sheer granite that no human being should have been able to climb. He looked at the bodies of his enemies, scattered across the mountain like leaves after a storm. And he understood that everything he had believed about the observer from base camp had been catastrophically wrong. Vasquez descended from the ridgeline with her rifle slung across her back, picking her way through the rocks with the careful efficiency of someone conserving energy for whatever came next. Her hands left bloody smears on every surface she touched, the torn skin of her fingers painting a trail down the mountainside. She felt the pain distantly, the way she felt most things during and after combat. It would matter later. Right now, there were wounded men who needed attention. The SEALs saw her coming. Every man capable of raising his head watched her approach in silence, their expressions cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked like the first stages of shock. She was not what they expected. She was not what anyone would have expected. Webb was the first to speak. He had been applying pressure to Kowalski's chest wound, his hands slick with his teammates' blood, and he looked up as Vasquez reached their position. "That was you," he said. It was not a question. "All of them. That was you." Vasquez nodded once and knelt beside Kowalski without ceremony. She checked his pulse, examined the entry wound, assessed his breathing. "Sucking chest wound," she said. "Do you have an occlusive dressing in your kit?" Webb stared at her for a moment, then fumbled through his medical pouch and produced the sealed plastic square. She took it from him, tore it open, and applied it to the wound with practiced hands. Her movements were quick and sure, the work of someone who had treated injuries like this before. Many times before. She moved to the next wounded man, Petty Officer Harrison, who had taken a round through the thigh. The bleeding had been partially controlled with a tourniquet, but his face was pale and his lips had taken on a bluish tint. She tightened the tourniquet one additional turn and checked his pulse at the ankle. Weak but present. He would keep his leg if they got him to surgery within 2 hours. Coulter sat against a boulder and watched her work. His shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat. The bullet still lodged somewhere beneath his collarbone, but he barely noticed. His mind was stuck on a single image. The cliff face. 400 feet of vertical granite. He had looked at it when they first reached the summit and dismissed it as impassable terrain. A natural barrier. Something no human being would ever attempt to climb. She had climbed it, with a rifle on her back, while his team was dying. "How?" he said. The word came out hoarse, scraped raw by smoke and shouting and the particular strain of watching men die. "How did you get up here?" Vasquez finished checking Harrison's vitals and looked at Coulter for the first time since she had arrived. Her face was blank, unreadable, showing neither pride nor accusation. "I climbed," she said. "That cliff is unclimbable. I looked at it myself." Vasquez held up her hands. The fingertips were shredded, the nails cracked and bloody, the palms torn in a dozen places. Raw meat where skin had been. The evidence of what that climb had cost her. Coulter stared at her hands and had no response. Reeves approached from the perimeter where he had been checking enemy bodies for survivors. None of them were breathing. 23 men scattered across the mountainside, each one killed with a single shot. He had been counting and recounting because the number seemed impossible. 23, he said. "You killed 23 men in less than a minute." 51 seconds, Vasquez said. She turned back to Kowalski, checking that the chest seal was holding. "He needs surgical intervention within 90 minutes, or we will lose him." The clinical precision of her response hit Reeves like a physical blow. She was not boasting. She was not seeking recognition. She was simply stating facts and moving on to the next problem that required solving. as if killing 23 enemy fighters from an impossible position was merely one item on a checklist. Vasquez keyed her radio. "Base camp, this is Vasquez. Request immediate medevac at grid 774 by 320. 3 urgent surgical, 1 priority for walking wounded. Area is secure. I say again, area is secure." The radio crackled with Colonel Harmon's voice. "Understood, Sergeant First Class. Weather is clearing. Medevac is spinning up now. ETA, 35 minutes. Vasquez acknowledged and turned back to her patients. Webb caught her arm as she passed, then released it immediately when he saw her wince. The climate cost her more than just the skin on her hands. "Those ribbons," he said, "the ones I saw at the briefing. Bronze Star with V, Purple Heart Cluster. What else is there? What else do you have that we did not see?" Vasquez looked at him with an expression that might have been exhaustion or might have been something older and heavier. "It does not matter what I have," she said. "It matters what I can do. And right now, I can keep these men alive until the helicopters arrive. That is what matters." She moved past him to check on the 3rd wounded SEAL, leaving Webb standing in the blood-stained rocks, trying to reconcile the woman he had dismissed at the briefing with the woman who had just saved every life on this mountain. Coulter pushed himself to his feet, his wounded arm hanging useless at his side. He walked to where Vasquez was working and stood over her, his shadow falling across her patient. "I will be dead," he said. The words came slowly, dragged out of somewhere deep. "My whole team would be dead. Because I did not listen. Because I assumed." Vasquez did not look up from her work. "I was just observing," she said. "That is what the orders say." Coulter stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words settling over him like a physical burden. Then he turned and walked to the edge of the ridge, staring out at the mountains, waiting for helicopters that would carry his men to safety. Safety delivered by an observer he had dismissed. Safety paid for in blood and torn skin and 51 seconds of impossible precision. He did not know how to carry that death. He was not sure he ever would. The helicopters delivered the wounded to Forward Operating Base Kendrick's surgical unit within 40 minutes of Vasquez's call. Kowalski went straight into emergency surgery. Harrison and Chun followed within the hour. Coulter refused treatment until his men were stabilized, sitting in the waiting area with blood drying on his uniform and a look in his eyes that spoke of calculations being revised. 12 hours later, Colonel Patricia Harmon convened the formal debrief in the operations center. The surviving team members sat in folding chairs, their faces drawn with exhaustion and something deeper. The 3 men in surgical recovery would provide statements when they were able. For now, Harmon needed to understand what had happened on that mountain. She stood before them with a tablet in her hands, scrolling through preliminary reports. "I need written statements from each of you," she said. "Complete account of the mission from departure to extraction. Include everything, every decision, every communication, every observation. Take your time and be thorough." She handed out statement forms and pens. The men began writing in silence. Webb stared at the blank page for a long moment before putting pen to paper. He wrote about the briefing, about seeing Vasquez's ribbon stack and feeling the first stirring of doubt. He wrote about the dismissive comments, the assumptions, the casual arrogance with which they had treated her. He wrote about the ambush, the chaos, the certainty that he was about to die on that ridge. And then he wrote about watching 23 enemy fighters fall in less than a minute, cut down by a shooter firing from a position that should have been impossible to reach. He wrote about the observer climbing down from the ridgeline with bloody hands and a calm expression, treating their wounded as if she had not just performed the most remarkable feat of marksmanship any of them had ever witnessed. At the bottom of his statement, he added a question that was not required but felt necessary. Who is she really? Harmon collected the statements and dismissed the team to rest. Then she walked to her office and placed a secure call to Marine Special Operations Command. "I need the complete service record for Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez," she said, "currently attached to my command as an observer." The officer on the other end paused. "That file is classified, Colonel. Need to know basis. You will require authorization from General Morrison directly." Harmon felt her jaw tighten. I have a team that was nearly wiped out today. I have 3 men in surgery. And I have an observer who single-handedly killed 23 hostiles after climbing a 400-foot cliff with her bare hands. I need to know who I am dealing with. Another pause. I will forward your request to General Morrison. He will contact you directly. The call ended. Harmon sat in the silence of her office and stared at the wall, trying to reconcile what she knew with what she had witnessed. Vasquez had arrived with minimal fanfare, carrying orders that described her as a marksmanship instructor conducting a joint training assessment. Nothing in those orders suggested she was capable of what she had done. But her ribbons had told a different story, and ribbons did not lie. In the medical facility, Webb found Coulter sitting beside Harrison's bed, watching the unconscious man breathe. The Master Chief's shoulder had been treated and bandaged, his arm immobilized in a sling, but he showed no intention of resting. Webb pulled up a chair and sat down. You should be sleeping, Master Chief. Coulter did not look at him. Could not sleep if I tried. He was quiet for a moment. Did you check her record before the briefing? Webb shook his head. Did not think to. She was just an observer. Coulter laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Just an observer. That is what I told myself. That is what I told the whole team. He finally turned to look at Webb, and his eyes held something Webb had never seen there before. Something that looked like shame. I saw her ribbons, Webb said. Bronze star with V device. Purple heart cluster. Combat action ribbon with stars. Those are not desk awards, Master Chief. Those are not given for filing paperwork. I know what they are, Coulter said. I saw them too. And I told myself they did not mean anything because she was a woman and women do not see real combat. He shook his head slowly. She climbed that cliff, Webb, 400 feet of vertical rock with a rifle on her back, while we were dying. And I told her to stay at base camp and observe. Webb had no response to that. There was no response that would help. Coulter's voice dropped lower. I have been a SEAL for 16 years. I have led men into combat on 4 continents. And today, I learned that my assumptions almost killed every man under my command. He looked at his bandaged shoulder, then at Harrison's pale face, then at the wall. I did not know how to carry that. The door opened and Harmon entered, her expression carefully neutral. She nodded to both men, then addressed Coulter directly. Rear Admiral Franklin is arriving tomorrow to oversee the investigation, she said. The intelligence failure, the ambush, the response. He will want statements from everyone involved. She paused. He asked specifically about Sergeant First Class Vasquez. When I mentioned her name, he went very quiet. Then he made a phone call. Coulter frowned. A phone call to who? Harmon shook her head. He did not say, but I got the impression that Vasquez is not quite what her orders describe. I got the impression that a lot of people at very high levels know exactly who she is. She left them with that, closing the door softly behind her. Webb and Coulter sat in silence, listening to Harrison breathe, waiting for answers that would not come until morning. General Morrison arrived at Forward Operating Base Kendrick on a military jet that had been diverted from scheduled flight to Washington. The base commander met him on the tarmac with a salute and a confused expression. Generals did not typically fly across continents for incident investigations involving a single ambush team. Morrison returned the salute and asked a single question. Where is Sergeant First Class Vasquez? She was directed to the mess hall, where Vasquez sat alone at a corner table, eating a meal she did not taste, her bandaged hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Morrison entered, dismissed the few other personnel with a look, and sat down across from her. They spoke for 11 minutes. No one else heard what was said. When they finished, Vasquez rose, nodded once, and left the mess hall with the same calm expression she had worn since climbing down from that ridge. Morrison remained seated for another few minutes, staring at the table, before he stood and went to find Colonel Harmon. Unseal her record, he said. The investigation team needs to understand what they are dealing with. Harmon blinked. Sir, I was told the file required your personal authorization. You have it. Morrison's voice carried a weariness that had nothing to do with the flight. She has been operating under a bureaucratic fiction for 6 years. Policy says women cannot hold combat sniper positions. Reality says she is the most effective sniper the Marine Corps has produced in 50 years. We have been hiding her in plain sight, calling her an observer, an advisor, an instructor. He shook his head. And yesterday that fiction almost got 8 men killed because no one took her seriously. He gave Harmon the authorization codes and left to prepare for the formal inquiry. 3,000 miles away at Camp Lejeune, Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Torres received a secure call from an investigator attached to the incident review. Torres had been Vasquez's spotter for 4 years across 3 deployments. If anyone knew her capabilities, it was him. The investigator asked about her service history. Torres laughed, but not with humor. "How much time do you have?" he said. "Because that woman's record reads like something out of a fiction novel. Except every word of it is true." He described Operation Dustwalker, a 3-day mission in hostile territory where Vasquez had been tasked with eliminating an enemy command structure that was coordinating attacks across an entire region. Torres had called wind corrections from 800 meters away while she worked. 31 confirmed kills in 72 hours. Every shot placed exactly where it needed to be. The enemy command structure ceased to exist. She received no public recognition, Torres said. No press coverage, no ceremony, no medal presentation with photographers. They gave her a Bronze Star with V device in a closed room with 3 witnesses and told her to never speak of the operation. Then they sent her back out 3 weeks later to do it again. The investigator asked about her total confirmed kills. Torres was quiet for a moment. 847, he said, as of her last deployment. She passed the previous Marine Corps record 4 years ago. She passed the all-service record 2 years after that. And officially, she does not exist as a combat sniper because policy says she cannot be one. He described the workaround that had allowed Vasquez to operate. She was perpetually attached to units as an observer, an advisor, a training coordinator. Her orders never specified combat duties. But somehow she always ended up in positions where her skills were needed, and somehow the enemy always died, and somehow the paperwork never quite reflected what had actually happened. 8 deployments, Torres said. Every theater we have operated in for the past decade. And every time, she goes out as something other than what she is, does the impossible, and comes home to train other snipers who will never be half as good as her. The investigator asked why she accepted these conditions. Why she did not demand recognition or refuse assignments that denied her true role. Torres was quiet for a long time before answering. Because she does not care about titles, he said. She cares about the mission. She cares about bringing people home. Everything else is noise to her. He paused. I watched her take a bullet through the shoulder on our 3rd deployment. She finished the mission, walked 6 miles to extraction, and did not mention the wound until we were on a helicopter. The medic found it when he saw the blood soaking through her jacket. She had not said a word. The call ended. The investigator sat in silence, staring at the notes he had taken, trying to reconcile the woman described in Torres's account with the observer who had been dismissed at a routine briefing. At Forward Operating Base Kendrick, Harmon read the unsealed file in her office with the door locked and the blinds drawn. The decorations section alone ran 4 pages. Bronze Star with V device. Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters indicating 3 total awards. Combat Action Ribbon with stars denoting 8 separate combat deployments. Meritorious Service Medal. Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with V device. The list continued. The notes section contained letters from 3 different theater commanders requesting her permanent attachment to their operations. All 3 requests had been denied due to policy restrictions on women in combat roles. One commander had written a single sentence that Harmon read 3 times. She is the finest sniper I have ever seen, and we are wasting her on bureaucratic games. Harmon closed the file and sat in darkness for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to the mess hall, and found Vasquez eating alone at the same corner table. She sat down across from her. 847, she said quietly. And they still call you an observer. Vasquez looked up from her meal. Her expression showed nothing. Not pride, not bitterness, not resignation. I get the job done, she said. Titles do not matter. Only results. Harmon studied her face, searching for some crack in that armor, some sign of the frustration that anyone else would feel. She found nothing. It matters, Harmon said. What they did to you. What they made you pretend to be. It matters. Vasquez took a sip of her cold coffee. 8 men are alive because I was on that mountain, she said. That is what matters to me. She returned to her meal, and Harmon understood that the conversation was over. The formal inquiry convened at 0800 in the base conference room. Rear Admiral Franklin sat at the center of a long table, flanked by 2 JAG officers and a court reporter. General Morrison occupied a chair against the wall, present as an observer but carrying an authority that everyone in the room understood. Colonel Harmon sat beside him with Vasquez's unsealed file in her lap. Vasquez herself was not present. She had not been called to testify. The inquiry's first phase focused on the decisions that had led to the ambush, not the actions that had ended it. Master Chief Brad Coulter entered in his dress uniform, his arms still immobilized in a sling, his face showing the particular exhaustion of a man who had not slept well in days. He took his seat at the witness table, raised his right hand, and swore to tell the truth. Franklin began with standard questions. Name, rank, unit assignment, years of service. Coulter answered each one in a flat monotone, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the Admiral's head. Then Franklin leaned forward. Master Chief, describe your preparation for the mission on the day in question. Coulter walked through the briefing, the intelligence packet, the team assignments. His voice remained steady until he reached the moment when Vasquez had entered the room. I was informed that an observer would be attached to the exercise, he said. Sergeant First Class Vasquez. I introduced her to the team as someone who would be watching for base camp. I did not review her qualifications. I did not ask about her experience. I assumed that an observer meant someone without relevant tactical skills. Franklin made note. Did you review the intelligence assessment for the mission? I reviewed it, yes. 3-week-old thermal imaging, satellite photography from the same period. No ground verification of the route. Did you identify any concerns with that assessment? Coulter's jaw tightened. No, Admiral. I did not. Sergeant First Class Vasquez did. She marked 3 potential ambush points on the map and brought them to my attention before we departed. The room went very still. Franklin's pen stopped moving. And what was your response to her concerns? Coulter looked down at the table. I dismissed them. I told her we had run 100 operations in those mountains, and the area was cold. I told her to stick to observing. Franklin let the silence stretch for a long moment before continuing. He picked up a document and read aloud. Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez, Marine Scout Sniper School Honor Graduate, class ranking first of 47. Designated Marksman Instructor Certification. 8 combat deployments across 6 years. He turned a page. Bronze Star with V device. Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. Combat Action Ribbon with 8 deployment stars. He turned another page. 847 confirmed kills, the highest total in Marine Corps history. He set the document down and looked at Coulter. You ordered this individual to remain at base camp and monitor communications. Coulter's voice came out barely above a whisper. Yes, Admiral. Why? The question hung in the air. Coulter closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, they were wet. Because I assumed, he said. I saw a woman with observer orders, and I assumed she was not a real operator. I assumed her ribbons were administrative awards. I assumed her concerns were inexperience rather than expertise. He took a breath that shook slightly. I made assumptions based on her gender, Admiral, and those assumptions almost got my entire team killed. Franklin nodded slowly. He glanced at Morrison, who sat motionless against the wall, then back at Coulter. Tell me what happened when the ambush began. Coulter described the first shots, the chaos, the wounded men, the desperate radio calls for air support that would not come. His voice steadied as he spoke, falling into the rhythm of an after-action report, but his hands trembled against the table. We were surrounded on 3 sides with a cliff at our back, he said. 25+ hostiles with coordinated fire. 3 of my men down in the first 30 seconds. Ammunition running critical. No extraction possible. He paused. I told my men to fix bayonets. I believed we were going to die on that ridge. And then? Coulter shook his head slowly, as if he still could not believe what he was about to say. And then hostiles started falling, one after another. No sound from our positions, no muzzle flash we could see. Just men dropping. 23 of them in less than a minute. He looked up at Franklin. She climbed the cliff, Admiral. 400 feet of vertical rock with a rifle on her back. She reached a position above the enemy and eliminated every threat on that mountain. Single-handedly. While I was preparing my men to die, Franklin wrote something on his notepad. Is there anything else you wish to add to your statement, Master Chief? Coulter straightened in his chair. His voice found strength it had been lacking. Yes, Admiral. I want to formally recommend Sergeant First Class Vasquez for the Navy Cross. Her actions demonstrated extraordinary heroism and complete disregard for her own safety. She saved 8 American lives through individual initiative and exceptional skill under fire. He paused. She also demonstrated more tactical awareness in 5 minutes than I showed in the entire mission. I was wrong about her. I was wrong about everything. And she saved us anyway. Franklin made a final note and set down his pen. Thank you, Master Chief. You are dismissed. Coulter rose, saluted, and walked toward the door. He paused with his hand on the frame and turned back. Admiral, he said, the policy that made her an observer instead of what she really is. That policy needs to change. Because if we keep hiding people like her behind paperwork and pretending they do not exist, we're going to get more men killed. He left before anyone could respond. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Franklin looked at Morrison. The general's expression had not changed throughout the testimony. I believe, Morrison said quietly, that Master Chief Coulter has made several excellent points. Franklin nodded and called for the next witness. Lieutenant Commander Davis took the witness seat with the confident posture of a man who believed he had done nothing wrong. He had served in intelligence operations for 12 years. He understood how assets were allocated, how priorities were established, how decisions were made under resource constraints. The ambush was a tragedy, certainly, but tragedies happened in operational environments. That did not mean someone had failed. Admiral Franklin studied him for a moment before beginning. Lieutenant Commander, you were responsible for the intelligence assessment provided to Alpha Team for their mission. Is that correct? Davis nodded. I prepared the assessment based on available data. Yes, Admiral. Describe that data. Thermal imaging of the operational area captured 3 weeks prior to the mission. Satellite photography from the same period. Historical analysis of activity patterns in the region. Davis spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. Standard package for a training exercise in a cold zone. Franklin picked up a folder and removed several pages. These are notes prepared by Sergeant First Class Vasquez prior to the mission. He laid them on the table, facing Davis. She identified 3 potential ambush points along the planned route. She noted the age of the thermal data. She flagged the lack of ground verification. He tapped the pages. She requested updated satellite imagery the morning of the mission. You denied that request. Davis shifted in his seat. It was a training exercise, Admiral. We do not allocate premium intelligence assets to routine training. Those resources are committed to active operations with confirmed threat profiles. Franklin's expression did not change. 3 men are in surgical recovery. 23 hostile fighters were killed on that mountain. Does that sound like a routine training exercise to you? The situation developed in ways that could not have been predicted, Davis said. His confidence had begun to waver. The area had been assessed as cold for 6 months. There was no indication of hostile presence. Franklin slid another document across the table. This is Sergeant First Class Vasquez's after-action report. She included a tactical analysis of the hostile force, their equipment, their positioning, their coordination. He paused. Her assessment is that they were not a random group. They were a trained unit operating with advanced knowledge of the team's route and timing. Davis stared at the document but did not touch it. The door opened and General Morrison entered, carrying a folder of his own. He did not apologize for the interruption. He walked to Franklin's table and handed him the folder. then took his seat against the wall without a word. Franklin opened the folder and read silently. His face, which had remained neutral throughout the proceedings, went pale. He looked up at Davis. "Lieutenant Commander, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to consider your answer very carefully. Did you approve any contractors for access to operational schedules in the past 6 months?" Davis blinked. "Contractors? I approved several support contracts for logistics and translation services. Standard procedure." Franklin read from a document in front of him. 3 weeks ago, a contractor named Samuel Whiting was granted access to training schedules for this region. His clearance was approved by your office. He looked up. Samuel Whiting was detained this morning by counterintelligence. He has been selling operational information to local militant groups for the past 8 months. The color drained from Davis's face. Morrison spoke for the first time. "The ambush was not an accident, Lieutenant Commander. It was not a failure of prediction or a gap in intelligence coverage. It was a deliberate operation planned by hostile forces who knew exactly when and where that team would be." He leaned forward slightly. "They knew because someone you approved told them." Davis's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Franklin set down the document. 8 American servicemen walked into a prepared kill zone because a contractor with access you authorized sold their schedule to the enemy. 3 of them are in surgery. All 8 of them would be dead if Sergeant First Class Vasquez had not disobeyed her orders, climbed an unclimbable cliff, and killed 23 hostiles in under a minute. "Admiral, I had no way of knowing," Davis started. "You had a way of knowing," Franklin cut him off. "Sergeant First Class Vasquez told you. She identified the threat. She requested updated imagery that would have shown hostile movement in the area. And you denied her request because you decided a training exercise did not justify the resources." He gathered the documents in front of him. "Your security vetting procedures failed. Your asset allocation decisions failed. Your judgment failed. And 8 men nearly paid for those failures with their lives." Davis sat frozen in his chair, the full weight of the situation finally settling over him. Morrison stood and walked to the table. He placed both hands flat on the surface and leaned toward Davis. "You have the right to legal counsel," he said quietly. "I suggest you exercise it. The investigation into the security breach will continue separately from this inquiry. You will make yourself available for all questioning." He straightened. "You are relieved of duty effective immediately." Davis looked from Morrison to Franklin to the JAG officers who had been silently recording everything. He found no sympathy in any of their faces. "Admiral," he said, his voice cracking, "I was following standard procedures. I made decisions based on established protocols." Franklin shook his head. "You made decisions that nearly killed 8 men. Protocols do not absolve you of judgment." He gestured toward the door. "You are dismissed, Lieutenant Commander." Davis rose on unsteady legs and walked out of the room. The door closed behind him with a sound like a verdict. Franklin looked at Morrison. "The security breach. How deep does it go?" Morrison's expression was grim. "We're still determining that. Whiting had access for 8 months. Every operation in this theater during that period is potentially compromised." He paused. "We got lucky this time. Vasquez was there. Next time we might not have someone willing to climb a cliff to save our people." Franklin nodded slowly and made a note in his file. "Call the next witness," he said, "and someone find out when Sergeant First Class Vasquez can testify. I think we need to hear directly from the woman who saw what everyone else missed." The formation assembled on the parade ground at 1,400 hours under a sky that had finally cleared after days of threatening weather. Every able-bodied service member at Forward Operating Base, Kendrick stood in ranks, their uniforms pressed, their postures rigid. Word had spread through the base with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. Something significant was happening. Something that involved the quiet woman who had arrived as an observer and departed the mountain as something else entirely. Vasquez stood in the front row, her bandaged hands clasped behind her back, her expression revealing nothing. She had changed into a fresh uniform, her ribbon stack precisely aligned above her left pocket, her boots polished to a mirror shine despite the dust that covered everything else on the base. She looked like what she was, a Marine, a professional, a woman who had done her job and expected nothing more. Admiral Franklin emerged from the headquarters building with General Morrison beside him. They walked to the raised platform at the front of the formation, their footsteps echoing in the silence. A chief petty officer followed, carrying a small wooden case. Franklin took his position behind the podium and surveyed the assembled personnel. His voice carried clearly across the parade ground. "Attention to orders," he said. The formation stiffened further, if that was possible. Franklin opened a folder and began to read. The Secretary of the Navy takes pleasure in presenting the Navy Cross to Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez, United States Marine Corps, for extraordinary heroism in connection with combat operations against an armed enemy. He described the ambush, the overwhelming hostile force, the desperate situation of Alpha Team. He described the 400-foot cliff and the woman who had climbed it with a rifle on her back and blood on her hands. He described 23 enemy fighters eliminated in 51 seconds. He described 8 American lives saved through individual initiative, exceptional courage, and complete disregard for personal safety. Sergeant First Class Vasquez's actions reflected great credit upon herself, the Marine Corps, and the United States Naval Service, Franklin concluded. He looked up from the folder. Sergeant First Class Vasquez, front and center. Vasquez marched forward, her movements precise, her face still showing nothing. She stopped before the Admiral and saluted. He returned the salute, then opened the wooden case and removed the Navy Cross, its blue and white ribbon bright against the dark velvet lining. He pinned the medal to her chest, just above the ribbon stack that already told the story of a remarkable career. Then he stepped back and saluted her again. "Congratulations, Sergeant First Class," he said. "This honor is long overdue." "Thank you, Admiral," Vasquez replied. Her voice was steady, professional, unchanged. In the ranks behind her, the SEAL team stood together. Coulter was at their center, his arms still in a sling, his eyes fixed on the woman receiving the medal. When Franklin finished the salute, Coulter raised his good hand to his brow. Beside him, Webb did the same. Then Reeves. Then every surviving member of Alpha Team, holding their salutes in unison, an unauthorized gesture that broke protocol in the most meaningful way possible. Franklin noticed. He said nothing. Some violations of protocol deserved to stand. The formation was dismissed, and the ranks dissolved into clusters of personnel offering congratulations and asking questions. Vasquez accepted handshakes with her bandaged fingers and answered questions with brief, factual responses. Yes, she had climbed the cliff. Yes, it had been difficult. No, she had not thought about the danger. There had not been time. Morrison found her at the edge of the crowd and drew her aside. His voice was low, meant only for her. "Policy review is underway," he said. "What happened to you, the observer fiction, the classification games, the pretending you were something other than what you are, that ends now." He paused. "I want you to lead the change. New integrated sniper program. Your standards, your methods, your command." Vasquez studied his face for a long moment. She had been passed over, overlooked, and hidden behind bureaucratic fictions for 6 years. She had watched less qualified operators receive recognition she had earned. She had never complained, never demanded, never insisted on acknowledgement. "Who would I be training?" she asked. Morrison allowed himself a small smile. "The best shooters we could find, men and women. No restrictions except performance." Vasquez nodded slowly. "When do I start?" "Report to Camp Lejeune in 2 weeks. We will have everything ready for you." He shook her hand, careful of her bandaged fingers, and walked away. Webb found her near the helipad an hour later, packing her gear for the flight back to the States. He stood at a distance until she acknowledged him with a glance. "The team wanted to buy you a drink before you left," he said. "Thank you for saving our lives." "That kind of thing." Vasquez shook her head. "I have a flight to catch." She zipped her bag closed. "But tell them I said they fought well. They held that position longer than most would have." Webb stepped closer. "I have to ask, those ribbons I saw at the briefing, the Bronze Star, The Purple Hearts. I knew something was wrong with how he treated you. I should have said something. You did not have the information to challenge your leadership, Vasquez said. That is not a failure. That is chain of command. It felt like a failure, Webb said quietly. It still does. Vasquez studied him with an expression that might have held sympathy or might have held something harder. Learn from it, she said. Next time you see someone dismissed for who they are instead of what they can do, say something. That is how things change. She shouldered her bag and walked toward the waiting helicopter. Coulter intercepted her before she reached the bird. He stood in her path, his sling a visible reminder of what had happened on that mountain, his face carrying the weight of everything he had said in the inquiry room. He extended his good hand. Vasquez looked at it for a moment, then took it. I was wrong, he said, about everything. I let bias nearly kill my men. Vasquez shook his hand once, firmly, then released it. I heard you recommended integrated training for all SEAL teams, she said. Coulter nodded. If someone like you exists, others do too. We cannot afford to miss them because we are too stubborn to look. Vasquez almost smiled. Almost. Good, she said. Then something useful came out of this. She walked past him and climbed into the helicopter. The rotors began to spin, whipping dust across the landing pad. Through the window, she looked out at the mountain where 8 men had nearly died and 23 men had met their end. Then the helicopter lifted off and carried her away, and forward operating base Kendrick became a shrinking collection of buildings in a vast and indifferent landscape. She flexed her bandaged hands and began planning her next mission. 6 months later, a new sign hung above a building at Camp Lejeune. Integrated Combat Sniper Program. The paint was fresh, the letters crisp and black against the white background. Inside, 12 Marines stood at attention in a classroom that smelled of new construction and fresh possibilities. Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez walked to the front of the room. The promotion had come through 3 months prior, along with orders that finally matched her actual role. No more observer. No more advisor. No more bureaucratic fictions designed to hide what she really was. She surveyed the 12 faces before her. 8 men for women. The best shooters the Marine Corps could find, selected through a qualification process she had designed herself. No accommodations. No adjustments. The same standards for everyone, and those standards were hers. You are here because you're the best, she said. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had earned every word. When you leave this program, you will be better. Some of you will not leave this program. The washout rate is 40%. I do not apologize for that. I will not lower the bar because someone struggles to reach it. She walked along the front row, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. You will learn to shoot in conditions that make other marksmen quit. You will learn to move through terrain that looks impassable. You will learn to think 3 steps ahead of your target and 5 steps ahead of your enemy. She stopped at the end of the row, and you will learn that the only thing that matters in this profession is results. Not your background, not your gender, not what anyone assumes about you before they see you work. She returned to the front of the room. Any questions? A young woman in the second row raised her hand. Master Sergeant, is it true you climbed a 400-foot cliff to save a SEAL team? Vasquez looked at her for a long moment. Yes, she said, and by the end of this program, you'll be able to do the same. She checked her watch. Range time in 15 minutes. Dismissed to gear up. The students filed out. Vasquez watched them go, remembering her own first day of sniper school 15 years ago. The instructor who had told her women did not belong. The classmates who had frozen her out. The obstacles that had nothing to do with skill and everything to do with assumptions. She had proven them wrong then. She was building a program now that would make such proving unnecessary. At a naval base 3,000 miles away, Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Webb stood before his own classroom. The men seated before him were new SEAL candidates, fresh from BUD/S, eager to learn the advanced skills that would make them operators. Webb pulled up a photograph on the screen behind him. A mountain ridge, a cliff face, a woman with a rifle. Before we start today's tactical module, he said, I want to tell you about the most important lesson I ever learned. It did not come from an instructor. It came from a mission that almost killed me and everyone on my team. He described the briefing where they had dismissed the observer, the assumptions they had made, the warnings they had ignored. He described the ambush, the chaos, the certainty of death. And he described watching 23 enemy fighters fall in under a minute, killed by a shooter they had refused to take seriously. Sergeant First Class Vasquez saw what we missed, he said. She tried to warn us, and we ignored her, because she did not fit what we expected an expert to look like. He paused. 8 of us are alive because she climbed a cliff we said was unclimbable and did a job we said she could not do. He clicked to the next slide. Vasquez's official service photo. Navy Cross visible on her chest. Never assume you know someone's capabilities, Webb said. The best operator I have ever seen spent 6 years being called an observer because policy said she could not be what she was. We almost died because of assumptions. Learn from our mistake. In a training command office at a different base, Brad Coulter reviewed curriculum documents with his new rank insignia visible on his collar. The promotion had surprised him. He had expected consequences for the failures on that mountain, not advancement. But the review board had noted his testimony, his recommendations, his willingness to acknowledge his errors publicly and work to correct them. He added a new section to the training manual. Joint integration protocols. In the margin, he wrote a note that would be removed before publication, but that he needed to write anyway. If Vasquez can climb a cliff to save us, the least we can do is listen. Lieutenant Commander Davis did not receive a new assignment. The investigation into the security breach had traced multiple failures to his office. The contractor he had approved, without proper vetting, had compromised 8 months of operations. 3 other missions had been affected, though none as catastrophically as Alpha Team's. His career was over. His clearance was revoked. The last anyone heard, he was working in the private sector, far from anything that mattered. Colonel Harmon received a letter on a Tuesday morning. She opened it in her office with a cup of coffee growing cold on her desk. The letter was for Vasquez's first training class. 11 of 12 candidates had passed qualification. Among them were the first 3 women to earn the Marine Scout Sniper MOS under the new integrated program. Harmon read the names twice. Then she filed the letter in a folder she had labeled proof and returned her work. At Camp Lejeune, evenings settled over the training facility. The students had gone to their barracks. The ranges were empty. The buildings stood quiet against a sky turning orange and purple with sunset. Vasquez walked to the long-distance range alone. She carried her rifle out of habit, out of comfort, out of a need that had never diminished across 15 years and 800 kills. She set up at the 1,000-meter line and settled behind her scope. The target was a steel silhouette barely visible in the fading light. Wind from the southwest at 6 miles per hour. Humidity dropping as the temperature fell. She calculated the adjustments automatically, the math as natural as breathing. She fired 5 rounds, walked downrange to check the target. 1 hole in the center, perfectly placed. 5 bullets through the same point of entry. She packed her rifle and walked back toward the main building as darkness claimed the range. Behind her, the mountains rose against the horizon, black shapes against a darkening sky. Somewhere in those mountains, or mountains like them, other teams were operating. Other snipers were watching. Other observers were being dismissed by men who could not see past their assumptions. Maybe you know what that feels like. Maybe you have been the one people underestimated. Maybe you have been the one doing the underestimating. Either way, there is something to learn from a woman who climbed an impossible cliff and saved 8 lives because giving up was never an option. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. And remember that the most dangerous thing you can do is assume you know what someone is capable of before you have seen them work. Vasquez reached the building and paused at the door. She looked back at the empty range, at the mountains beyond, at the sky now scattered with stars. Then she went inside to plan tomorrow's training. There was always more work to do.